All right, welcome to week 6 of the 14-week adventure of database administration and design. I have not gotten to the grading for this week yet. I'll be doing that tomorrow, so we'll get that all squared away. Pulling up the examples for this week. We're in week 6.
Hey, Don.
Yep.
The secret word from last week's test.
Yes, I'm getting very frustrated. I keep forgetting to do it in the thing, so I'm gonna
sorry.
start.
I'm sorry to bring this up. I just wanted to.
No. I realized today that I hadn't done it, and the problem is, by the time I realized, I went to do it last week after the video, I went to do it, and then I got distracted with something with going on at the house, and I went to do it today, and I've already had like 8 or 9 people. The thing is, like, there's so many people like take the test like early. There's always about 20% of the class that is just barreling through, and on Sunday and Monday they're doing the next week's work. So I need to get better at that. And I do apologize about that. It's something I really wanted to do, but I am not doing well at it. So no, please don't feel bad about reminding me that if I say I'm going to do something, please remind me that I said I was going to do it. Oh, this is a fun week. Okay, good. Okay. So yeah, so it wasn't on the test this week. I need to do it. What I need to do is just before I log in, do it. Oh, there it is too, because it was supposed to be Santa Fe. And there was the word right there. It bugs me when one of my quirks personally is when I say I'm going to do something and then I forget about it. It irritates me. So we'll just keep the same secret word for next week. We'll keep Santa Fe, and I'm going to make sure I do that.
Okay, so it'll be the same word.
Yeah, it'll be the same word, Santa Fe. Because I like that one. That was a good one. I'm sad I didn't use it. Yeah, so we'll get that done, and I will take care of that.
What happened to like Mistborn and Pikachu?
That was week. Mistborn was week 3. Week 3. So week 4 and week 5, I missed putting it in there. So week 2 was Pikachu. Week 3 was Mistborn. I forgot what week 4 was supposed to be, and week 5 was supposed to be Santa Fe.
Week 4 was Pikachu, and week 2 was Dagobah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I forgot. So then week 4 is the first week that I forgot to do it. So week 4 is supposed to be Pikachu, and then I didn't do it. And then last week was supposed to be Santa Fe, and I didn't do it. But I'm going to do Santa Fe this week. If not, everyone gets a free pass on the week 7 assignment for the essay writing. No one's write the essay on week 7 if I don't do it. How's that?
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So if I don't do it, everyone gets a free pass on the week 7 assignment for essay, the paper, not anything else. You get a free pass on the paper. All right, that'll give me incentive to remember to do it, because that'd be fun to try to explain how I give everyone a free pass on that one. But it's okay. Anyway, so yeah, so we will a bunch of you, and I don't know who's I don't think anyone here, but a number of people, if you're watching at home and this is like Friday morning and you're catching up, there are a lot of people who've been emailing me with the late work. Thank you. Remember, I accept late work up until week 10, and without question, I will just take it and grade it. After week 10, I don't take any more late work. And then I did forget to mention last week about the final paper, the final assignment. It's due in week 12. It's due at the end of week 12, and that's just so I can have a good week to grade it. I think the date on the Canvas is the week 13, but I need it in by week 12. Just so it takes me probably 4 or 5 hours per to grade, because I try to give good comments, and I have to do the whole create the database, run the stuff, check the code and everything. So it takes a minute to grade them. And I grade those myself. I don't let the TA grade those. All right. Any other questions on last week's work, the week 5 stuff? There were a number of questions that, oh, did I say we're in week 6? Okay, we're in week 6. When you take the quiz, if I don't get to them in time, there are a bunch of questions that ask you about the VI editor. If you see them, just let me know right away. I'm gonna tonight after this call, I got to go in there and I got to get rid of those because there's a dozen or so questions about VI editor, and it's not mentioned anywhere in the text. It's not mentioned in the text. It's not mentioned in the website. It's not mentioned anywhere. So I don't know how those questions got in there. And I did finally get they finally did give me permissions so I can change the master questions. So they'll never be there again. Not that that's any great thing for you guys, because this is a one and done for you, but next semester I don't have to worry with those stupid questions again. So so yeah. So if you see anything with the editor, just let me know right away, and I will go in. And for those who've been telling me about questions you've had with issues, I've gone and just given you credit for it. The exercises, there's only one shot on those. I've had a couple people email me about fixing that, and if you send me the correction, I'll give you the grade for it. But generally speaking, the exercises are one shot because those you have a long time to do them. Even it's kind of odd that the quizzes are do it 2 times because they're open everything. But because some of the questions are worded the way they are, I make sure that I let it. Some of the teachers don't let it do 2 times on the quizzes, but I do let do 2 times on the quizzes. Okay, are there any questions about the previous weeks? Everyone doing good? Joins, inner joins, everything? All right. So this week, we're going to talk about. I really enjoy what we're about to talk about today, because I'm going to teach you. I will teach you this week the one thing that if you ever get to be a professional DBA will save you from losing your job. And you think I'm kidding, but I'm not, because this has saved me from losing my job, because sometimes you make a mistake and it's a big one. One time, and I don't know how I didn't lose my job. I was running some SQL queries, and in the queries, I was running some code, and the code sent an email out every time it reached a certain place in the email, in the code rather, and it was only supposed to send it to me. But I had made a change in it before I left work that day, and it was sending it to everybody in the company, and I accidentally left it running. And when it kicked off automatically at 6:45 a.m., it shot out 2.6 million emails within the scope of 45 seconds. And they all bounced back. So by the time it was done, within 3 minutes, there were about 15, 16 emails running around the email system, and it shut down the email for the entire company for the day. So we make fun mistakes sometimes. So okay, so let me share my screen here. All right. So this week, I'm going to be talking about insert statements and how they work. And I'm going to talk about insert, updates, and deletes, because we talked all about selects. Now we're going to talk about the other 4 of the DMLs. And this ties into this week's lesson, but then I'm going to talk about something that's, I'm going to talk about transactions, and transactions, I don't know. They used to be in around week 12, week 11 or 12, so I'm not sure if they're still there or not. So insert, updates, and deletes are the way we get data into and manipulate into the database. So here's deep dive information about how inserts, updates, and deletes work. So did I talk to you about how transaction logs work? Yep.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, we're gonna talk about that right now. Give me my MS Paint. So there's an interesting thing about how databases work. So let's see. Here's my database. Okay. Getting all fancy here, okay? And here is my user. Okay.
Hey, you don't have your MS Paint up.
Oh, I don't. I'm not sharing the I thought I was sharing the entire screen. Hang on. I'm not sharing. Oh, there we are. I just shared the okay, here we are. Can you see it now?
Yep, can see it.
Okay, so here's the database. Here's the end user. So now I told you guys that the data exists on the hard disk, right? And that's where it is. So how it gets written there is important to understand. So here's what happens. No, stop that. No, that's not what I'm saying. Here, boom. Boom, get my little laptop here back here. Okay. So when you write data, when you put a computer and hit the send button, it does not write directly to the hard disk. Okay. Because there's a lot of bad things that can happen on the way there. Like, let's say I'm inserting 10,000 rows of data, right? And I hit the send on my laptop and it's writing this over, and then the power dies and all of a sudden that's broken, right? So we don't know how many rows actually got in. We don't know what's wrong. We've actually just corrupted our database at that point. So in the database world, get rid of this here as best I can. There's something called write-ahead transaction logging. So when you create a database, there are two files that are made, and I'm gonna use the SQL designation because I forget what they are in Oracle. I think in Oracle they're PDF. No. PDB and LDB. And in SQL they're called MDF and LDF. They're the database log file and the log file. So when you write to a database, what happens is this. Your computer writes the transaction log, and then the transaction log writes to the database. So there's this middleman here called the transaction log, right? So if you're writing 10,000, you're writing 10,000 rows to the database, it starts going to here and it starts filling up the transaction log, right? And every transaction log entry has a specific number. So it's just kind of logged on to 1, 2, 3 down to 50 billion, right? So you're writing them here, and then at a certain point when this buffer is full, it starts writing it to the database. Okay. So now what happens if the power goes out and this stops, and they've only about halfway, when the database comes back up, it's going to look at itself and say, hey, here's the last log number I have, because every time something's changed in the database, it has that log number with it, right? So it'll take that log number and look at the transaction log and say, do these match? And if they don't match, it knows something's wrong, and the database becomes immediately something called suspect, because not everything's there that it should be, right? When the initial transaction happens from the computer going over here, the first thing that happens in the transaction log is it tells you how many rows are coming through. So it'll tell you expect 10,000 rows, right? So it'll know all the LDFs, the log data files, not LDFs, the LDPs, that all the numbers that will be there. So it'll tell you it should be like from 10,001 to 11,000 or whatever it is, right? So if the power goes down, the database comes back up. At every time this happens, it looks at the last log number that's in the database, and then it looks at the transaction log and sees what its last number is there. And if they don't match, the database comes up as suspect. Then what happens is it looks back to the last query that started in the transaction log and see what that number is supposed to be. So what happens is this. So let's say 10,000 was supposed to go in, and everything wrote to the transaction log, right? but halfway through it died. So it's missing like 4,000 rows. Database comes back up, says, hey, we don't match. How many rows am I supposed to have? Well, you're supposed to be at log number 10,500. And the database, great. What's the last log number you have? They're at 10,500. So what happens is, even though there's a power outage, the data insert continues because everything's in the log, right? So it says, hang on a second, we had a bump. We can keep inputting the data. If the log doesn't have all the information it's supposed to, then it automatically rolls back all the changes that happened to get it back to where the numbers are in sync. Okay, so that means that databases are inherently developed to be self-healing. Okay, if it can't do either of those things, it comes up back as suspect and you have to restore it from backup. But that's the odd man out. That doesn't normally happen unless something really bad happens with the reboot. So the whole thing with transaction logging is you have this live document that sits in RAM, right? And it writes things. So what happens is, so it writes from here to here and then signals that it's done and all is good. And when that's done, you get your computer here says everything's inserted properly. So does that make sense how the logging works? Everyone good? Thumbs up, nods. All right. So so we're gonna do a little bit deeper than that, right? So when you manipulate data and it goes in the transaction log, they're actually in the transaction logs, there are tables that are used. So all the data is staged into a table, and that table is then moved into the database table, which makes perfect sense. That's how you think it would be, right? So all this stuff is staged in there. When you do insert, updates, and deletes, there's a couple things happen. So when you do an insert statement, it creates an inserted table, right? And so what happens is everything that's supposed to be inserted into the database table gets inserted into that table and the temp file, and then it gets transferred over this. You have this big long table that grows with all the rows there, and that gets moved over to the database. When you delete things, it does the opposite. You send that delete message over and you say delete from table, it goes back into the transaction log and pulls all that data into the transaction log, into a deleted table, and then it deletes from the hard drive. Okay, because that transaction log that you have there is a critical piece of data should you ever have a failure. Because if your database comes back as corrupt and you have to restore it from last night's backup, that transaction log, if you know how to use it, will get you up to the point of the corruption. So if your backup was from 1 a.m., right, and you have the transaction log that started at 2 a.m. when it came back up after the backup ended to 3 p.m. where we are now, you can use that transaction log up until the point of failure to restore the database, so the customer didn't lose any data. So that's a critical piece of information, right? So, and since it tracks deletes as well, it stands to reason that if you ran a massive delete, it would pull that information into the transaction log, and then that table there, it's called. So when you insert stuff, it's the inserted table. When you delete stuff, it's called the deleted table. And you can't do it in MySQL, but if you are running transactions for inserts and deleted, and you run a query in Microsoft SQL Server, and you say select star from deleted, it will show you everything that was deleted that's in the log. So deletes creates deleted table. Updates, however, updates do both. Update creates an inserted table and a deleted table, because when you're updating data, you're deleting the old data and inserting the new data. So there is a lot of complicated activity going on behind the scenes when you are inserting and updating and modifying data because of this transaction log. And it is a very complicated, but it's also very necessary and very critical to successful database health. Okay, everyone follow me? Okay, so that's how the transaction log, this is like, I could talk literally for 3 hours on the transaction log because there's a lot of how it works and how things, but I'm not going to bore you guys with that. Suffice it to say, it's a critical piece, and it's important to know that, and this isn't on a test anywhere, this is just in case you're interested with the transaction log. It creates these two different tables, insert and deleted, based on what it's doing. So when we go back here, so I'm gonna go ahead and create a quick table here. Let me use my Sakilla file. Well, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and, I think this table's already there. I'm gonna drop it real quick. I'm gonna create a table. I'm gonna create a table persons, a person. No, I'm gonna keep it persons. Has a person ID, it's integer, set to not null, and auto increment, which means it'll start at 1 and move its way up from there. Last name varchar 255, not null. First name varchar 255. Age is an integer. Email is a varchar, email, and personal ID. Right. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and create this table. So the primary key is personal ID. Go ahead and create the table. Now, when you write an insert statement, you can absolutely write the insert statement like that without the without anything there. You don't want to do that. I don't like doing that, because if you've got a large table with a lot of columns and you're using this value statement, and if you don't get this exactly right, it's going to be a problem, because you're going to get an error saying that it doesn't match. So like if I try to run, if I ran this one now, if I just insert into persons, person ID, last name, first name, age, here's 16 Williams Venus, and this is just a little show offy. This just gives me a random number between 1 and 50 or something like that. That's all this does. I just need a way to generate a quick random number, and that gave it to me. So if I run this, it'll insert 1 row. If I take that away and try to run this, I get an error. Column count doesn't match value count at row 1. That means this doesn't match because I don't have enough columns going into here. So person ID Williams, first name, and then I don't have an age. I'm missing 1 here, right? I can, however, do this. And I can run this, because person ID is an integer, it's also auto increment, so I don't need to have it in my insert statement. So I can just do this, and this will work. Right, row and row affected. So it inserted into there. Okay, there's my 2 rows. Okay. I can also, so when I do my insert statement, I can do it one at a time like this, right? Or I can do it like this: insert into persons, last name, first name, age, and then I can add values and just keep adding comma, 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 just for different values. Okay. And if I run this, it's going to run fine, because it just sees the comments. It just sees as new, each individual row is being inserted into the table. And this, I don't have to have the ID there, because it's defaulted in there. If I tried to run this without this here, I'm going to get an error, because the table wants 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, right? I don't have to do person ID. And I really don't have to do these either, right? Because they're all not null. The only ones I really have to do are the ones that do last name, because that's not null. But if I do this and I do insert into persons, I don't have the columns that I'm supposed to use, it's going to error out, because it doesn't know where anything's supposed to go, because it has a lot of choices where to put things, right? So if I run this, I'll insert 4 rows. I do my little select statement. And now I've got all the, and notice that we're still, oh yeah. So I'm ordering by last name. So that's why the numbers are all out of akimbo. The other thing I can do, the third way to insert into tables is I can insert based on a select statement. So I can do insert into person's last name, first name, and age, and then I can select all the names from actor and put them in. So as long as my select statement matches the columns here, it'll work. So this is the data I'm looking to put in there, right? So if I do this, it inserts 1,000 rows or 200 rows, right? So go here. And I've now populated that table with everything it needs to be in there. Everyone with me still? All right, silence is consent. So now you'll notice I had an email column here that's unfilled. So I can use an update statement to put that data in. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to update persons. I'm going to set the email to, and I'm going to concatenate the first name and the last name and adding to change it to GMAOL is the email address, right? When I do this update statement, I don't have a where clause. So that means I'm going to affect every row in this table. When I run this, it affects everything. Because I'm not giving it a where clause. I'm saying do it all. That was okay. So let me run this. And I have 206 rows affected. And I'll do my select statement. And I got it spelled wrong. And that's a problem. I can run an update statement with a replace command. So in this case, update person set email equal to, and I'm replacing. And what I'm saying is look in the email column, find this and replace it with this. Okay. Run that and look at my stuff. And everything is fixed. Okay. Now, if I did this in a live production database, it would be problematic because I just broke the database and I've got to go fix it before anything happens. So in the coding of SQL, there's something called transaction. So this is a transaction. This is a transaction. This is a transaction. These are implicit transactions, means I've implied them to be transaction because they're code that I'm running. And because I didn't define anything specifically, it's just implied, like if I ran all these at once, okay, that is one transaction because I've implied it to be, I'm running all this code at once. It's an implied transaction. So if I do this, it ran just fine. Okay, it added stuff in there but it ran as one giant transaction. Okay, which means it starts here, it ends here, and everything changes, and that's that. We can specify a transaction, and that anything that happens between the start transaction and these two commands here is subject to is isolated from everything else. Now the interesting, and this is why I talked about the transaction lock, right? So with this thing here, right? If I run start transaction and this data here, what happens is it writes it to the transaction log, but not to the database. Okay, it's in the transaction log. And until I tell it to, it will not write it to the database. This means you have the opportunity to make sure you got it right before you commit it. So here, I can run this. Let me do this here. me grab this here. Is it 4 9s or 3 9s? Just 4 9s, 4 9, 9, 9. Okay. So I run this. And there's 0 rows. I run this. And it says 98 rows affected, 98 or 91 rows changed. But if I go back up to here, there's still 0 rows because I rolled it back. All this did was run the transaction, ran it against the database, recorded it to the transaction log, made sure it works, and then I said roll back, so it rolled it back, and so it never actually happened. It was just a test. It was a dry run. Instead, if I go here and comment out rollback, I have commit, then in that case, the rows stay. If you go into the world of database development programming, this transaction statement will it save your bacon at least a half a dozen times. I'll put a guarantee on that. All right. This can be used for anything: deletes, updates, inserts, whatever. You can put it through the transaction engine first. If you do this, okay, the transaction is running and you haven't closed it yet. So you have an open transaction that's waiting for something else to do. What this means is in week 14, no, in week 13, you're going to talk about transaction locks. So basically, I've locked down the customer table right now and the person table because I've got an open transaction on both of them. So no one else can touch those tables. If someone else was coming in from a different terminal, trying to run something there, it would error out and would say, it would probably cause a deadlock because no one can touch those tables right now until I release this transaction. And then I just have to go here and commit it. Okay. It's important to remember when you use a explicit transaction that you end that transaction, because if not, you will lock down the database until it's closed and someone comes in after you and closes it. Make sense? Everyone good? Am I going too fast? All right. So now we come into the delete statement. Okay. So I can delete if I just ran this statement here. Okay. Okay. So when you run a delete statement in a database, it doesn't delete everything. Like I told you, it takes that data from the database, pulls it into the transaction log, and then goes back and deletes it, run one row at a time from the database. So in this case, what would have happened if I wasn't in a transaction here? If I ran delete from persons, it would go in, pull the 406 rows in, and then go back and delete them one at a time from the database. It's not a blanket thing. Okay. This is because if you ever needed to roll back, if something happened, you delete something you're supposed to, you can go to the transaction log and restore it from there if you've accidentally used it, as long as you use the delete command. There's another command that deletes everything, but it doesn't do it that way. If I go here and I say delete from persons where last name like W, we know what the word like we've looked at this before. So what this is going to do, it's going to delete everything where the last name is like W. It's very straightforward, right? I can also, and you can do this in updates too, I can also use an inner join on my delete. I can delete from persons, interjoining customer, where the last name for persons is the same as last name as customers, right? So I took this and I moved it into here. And I rolled that back once it was done. It would have deleted 91 rows, but they're still there because I didn't delete them. Okay. So if I just want to do that, I'm going to run my delete statements. I've deleted 42 rows. I run my delete statement here. I've deleted another 65 rows. So if I run this over, we're now down to 299 rows because we've deleted so many other rows. Okay. The last command that you can use that is considered a DML, data manipulation language command, but it runs very, very differently, is the truncate the truncate table. Truncate table is essentially like flushing the table. It just does everything at once and you can't get it back. It is not a logged action. Okay. This does not, if you looked in the transaction log when you ran delete from persons where last name's like W, you'd go in and you'd see the rows that you deleted. You'd see delete persons, blah, 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 and then you see the rows deleted. If you do truncate table persons, you go in the log, you see truncate table persons, and that's all you see. There's nothing left after that. It just estimates it. And I think, if I am not mistaken, I may be wrong here, I'm willing to take that chance. If I put this here, and I do this, see if I'm right. Yeah, see? It can't roll back because it's gone forever. And it was in the transaction. And I said to roll it back, but it can't because truncate is not a logged action. All right. Any questions on this stuff?
Are there any actual instances where you've used truncate?
Yeah. If you load a table with temporary data, like if you let's say you're loading in, you're taking in from another database and you need to massage the data before you do it in there, you'll load in the temp data and put in that table and then do what you need to put it somewhere else and then truncate that table. If you're moving data from one place to another and don't need the remaining table of the data there, it's mostly used in dev environments, but it can be used in production. But yeah, there are times, very specific times when you would use truncate. And they're almost all very prescriptive. It's not just like we need to get rid of this table of data in here. Because if I really need to do that, I would just drop the table. But yeah, it's like if you're like I used to have this. So when I worked for a company called Property Insight, we would ingest I think I told you guys about this. It was it's a really cool concept. They would get property data from every county in the country and they would ingest that into our databases. So what would happen is they would send their database over in whatever form it was, and then we'd restore it, and then we'd take all their data, we'd have this huge query that pull their data out into one table, a temporary table into our database. And from there, because sometimes they would send us Maricopa County in Arizona would send us literal like spreadsheets of Excel with their data. So we had to ingest that in. So we'd bring it in, we take it from the spreadsheet, put it into the database, into a temp table, and then we would parse that data out into whatever tables it needed to go to, and then we'd truncate the original table because we didn't need that data anymore. So yeah, there are times when you would use truncate. But yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Anyone have any questions on their projects and the ERDs, anything along those lines to discuss? All right.
Is there a date on the ERDs or everything's due in the end of the semester?
Everything's due on week 12. You can share stuff with him beforehand, but you don't have to turn in you don't turn the ERD. Everything comes in one. So everything comes in one package. You send the zip file, you upload it to the Canvas and do it. But we don't turn it in piecemeal to me. If you want to show me something ask my thoughts and
Mhm.
opinions, send it to me. But I'll accept it in one big thing at the end of the semester.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
No problem. And then next week and week after next, during this time at night, at the end of the meeting, at the end of what I'm done, if anyone had any questions about their stuff, they want to show their ERDs, we can discuss it, look over it. That's always a fun thing. As of week, I might change that this year. Usually around week 10, these meetings become very dependent on anyone who's got a question about their final projects. But they've tweaked the end of the course, so there's some interesting stuff we can talk about as far as the chapters are concerned and the lessons there. But around week 9 or 10, these Wednesday nights become more about any Q&A for the final projects, because that's when people like really getting down into doing the final project stuff. Any other questions? All right, Lewis, you came in late. You doing good? Okay, cool. All right, if there's nothing else, we're gonna go ahead and put a pin in it for tonight, because I'm gonna
Oh, I
jump in.
think Nathan asked something in the chat.
Oh, I didn't see that. I'm sorry, Nathan. Thanks for that. What the project essay for this week? Oh, the essays for the week, if you're doing the project, is just tell me how you're doing. So like this week, I've finalized what I'm doing. It's going to be on, I'm going to write a database for my slug collection, and I started writing the query tables. That's what it is. All at this point in time, you're doing the final project. Those weekly essays are just a journal entry me to tell me how you're doing, because that's how I keep track of it with you guys. And it's also a place to ask me questions like, hey, like with Camilla, like if you've got a question about your ERD, pop it in there, send me the JPEG of the ERD and say I've got a question about that, and I'll reply to it. All right, cool. I sorry, I didn't see the chat. Thanks for pointing that out, Zach. All right, if there's nothing else. All right, you guys have a great week. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, 3-day weekend. Go get some good cookout. So I'll talk to you later.
All right, see you.
Bye.